Behind wrestling's bright lights and roaring crowds lies a side of the industry that is rarely spoken about, a side filled with loss, mystery, and stories that have left a permanent mark on professional wrestling. Some of the names in this iceberg were on top of the world, until fate struck them in ways that no one saw coming. Others stepped into the ring, never realizing they were walking toward their final moments. These are the stories that wrestling doesn't want you to remember. This is the Wrestling Tragedies Iceberg. Disclaimer: this video is made for educational and documentary purposes, and is not intended to disrespect any of the individuals mentioned, but to shed light on the forgotten tragedies in wrestling history. Viewer discretion is advised. And we're starting off at the tippity top of the iceberg, Tier 6, with our first entry on Tier 6 being Owen Hart. Owen Hart, the brother of Bret Hart, was a fan favorite and a technical wrestling genius with natural charisma that made him beloved both in and outside the ring. Owen built his reputation through his blend of athleticism and personality, but no amount of skill or experience could prepare him for what would happen on May 23, 1999. At WWE's Over the Edge pay-per-view in Kansas City, Owen, performing under his comedic Blue Blazer gimmick, was set to make a superhero-style entrance. The stunt called for him to be lowered from the rafters, then unhook the harness in a dramatic fail just before landing. But something went terribly wrong. The harness system WWE used that night was different. It was designed for a quick release rather than a controlled descent. It was meant to allow Owen to detach smoothly, but the mechanism was too sensitive. As he was being suspended high above the ring, an accidental trigger released the latch, and Owen fell over 70 feet, plummeting at full speed. He crashed chest first into the top rope, near the turnbuckle, before hitting the mat. The impact was catastrophic. Fans in the arena saw his lifeless body lying in the ring, but many watching at home had no idea what had just happened. Jim Ross, WWE's commentator for that night, was handed an impossible task, breaking the news to the audience. Medics had rushed in, but Owen had suffered blunt force trauma to the chest and suffered from massive internal injuries. He was rushed to the hospital, but there was nothing doctors could do, and he was pronounced dead at just 34 years old. Despite what had just happened, WWE chose to continue the show. Matches went on, even as wrestlers broke down backstage, struggling to comprehend what had just unfolded. The next night, Raw aired as a tribute to Owen, with his colleagues struggling through their words and some openly crying on TV. The fallout was immediate. Owen's widow, Martha Hart, sued WWE, blaming their negligence for his death. The case was settled for $18 million, but the damage was done, and to this day, Owen Hart has never been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, as Martha refuses to let WWE profit from his name. And up next, we have Ashley Massaro. Ashley Massaro was a professional wrestler in WWE from 2005 until 2008, and she was a former WWE Women's Champion. During Massaro's time with the company, she was part of a 4-member group that traveled to Afghanistan, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Massaro, along with Maria Kanellis, Ron Simmons, and Jimmy Hart, traveled to the Middle East with the US Army. At the time of her trip, she became the victim of R-word. After returning from the trip, she informed the WWE doctor about the incident, and the doctor told Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon then immediately called her and told her to not publicly disclose the incident. Massaro has said in interviews that she only agreed because she was completely traumatized. At that point, she also said that Vince McMahon convinced her to keep quiet because if she came out with her R-word, then it would ruin the relationship that WWE and the US military had. This is again another instance of Vince McMahon putting money and reputation over true justice and people. She also said that Vince McMahon didn't offer any therapy or counseling of any sort, and she did not get any support from WWE with regards to her R-word. She left the company soon after this incident, and in 2016, Massaro joined a class action lawsuit against WWE, alleging that the company concealed risks of injury that caused wrestlers neurological damage. In this lawsuit, Massaro also told her story of her R-word at a US military base during a WWE tour of Kuwait, and she went into detail about how Vince McMahon persuaded her not to speak up about the incident. The lawsuit was dismissed in 2018, however. This whole ordeal sent Massaro into a deep depression, and just a year after the lawsuit was dismissed, Massaro was found deceased in her New York home, and it turns out that Massaro had actually taken her own life. And up next we have Droz. Droz was a natural athlete, a former NFL player who transitioned into wrestling with an unconventional gimmick, as he had the ability to vomit on command, earning him the nickname Puke. However, on October 5, 1999, during a taping of SmackDown, Droz's life would change. Droz faced D'Lo Brown in what should have been a routine match, but one move changed everything. Brown went for his running powerbomb, a move that he had executed countless times before, but this time something went wrong. Accounts vary. Some say Droz's loose shirt made it difficult for D'Lo Brown to get a proper grip. Others suggest it was a slip. But what's undeniable is the landing. Droz didn't rotate fully. Instead of taking the impact across his back, he came down directly on his head. The arena fell silent as the reality of what had just happened set in. Droz couldn't move. The referees and medical staff rushed into the ring and the match was immediately stopped. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors confirmed the worst. He had fractured 2 vertebrae in his neck and he was paralyzed from the neck down. D'Lo Brown was devastated, taking responsibility for the accident even though Droz never blamed him. In fact, Droz repeatedly defended Brown, insisting that it was a tragic accident and not his opponent's fault. Despite losing his ability to walk, Droz remained a part of WWE, contributing to their website and magazine. Over the years, he regained limited movement in his upper body, but never fully recovered, and in 2023, he passed away at the age of 54 due to complications from his paralysis. And up next, we have the Von Erichs. The story of the Von Erich family is one of the most haunting tragedies in wrestling history, as 4 or 5 brothers all died before their own father. It all began with Fritz Von Erich, the patriarch of the family and a wrestling promoter. He built world-class championship wrestling, WCCW, with his sons becoming the promotion's biggest stars. David, Kerry, Kevin, Mike, and Chris Von Erich were young, athletic, and idolized in Texas. But behind the fame was a legacy of pain that would slowly destroy the family. The tragedy started in 1984. David Von Erich, considered by many as the best wrestler of the family and a future world champion, died suddenly at 25 years old while on tour in Japan. The official cause was acute enteritis, but many rumors have swirled that it was a drug overdose covered up by the company. His death shook the family, but it was just the beginning, because in 1986, Mike Von Erich suffered a shoulder injury, leading to toxic shock syndrome after a botched surgery. His mental and physical health deteriorated, and feeling like he could never live up to his family's legacy, he committed suicide at just 23 years old. 3 years later, Chris Von Erich, the youngest and most physically fragile of the brothers, followed the same tragic path. Then came Kerry Von Erich, perhaps the Von Erich with the most success in wrestling. He was a former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, and he even wrestled in WWE as the Texas Tornado for a while. But after a motorcycle accident in 1986, he secretly wrestled with a prosthetic foot, a fact hidden from fans for years. His drug addiction also spiraled, leading to multiple arrests. Facing a prison sentence and unable to cope with his demons, Kerry committed in 1993 at just 33 years old. Kevin Von Erich, the last surviving brother, was left to carry the weight of it all. He walked away from wrestling, later speaking about how he nearly followed the same path, but chose to live for his family. And up next we have Eddie Guerrero. Born into the legendary Guerrero family, Eddie Guerrero had natural charisma, in-ring genius, and an underdog spirit that made fans love him. But behind the scenes, he fought a war against addiction and substance abuse, one that cost him everything. But that wasn't all. Like many wrestlers of his era, he used roids to maintain his physique and keep up with the brutal demands of WWE's schedule. This cocktail of substance abuse, PEDs, and painkillers took a toll on his body. He eventually reached the peak of his career when he won the WWE Championship in 2004, but his past left scars that couldn't heal. Years of abuse to his body had damaged his heart, and on November 13, 2005, Eddie was found unconscious in his hotel room by his nephew, Chavo Guerrero. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Eddie was pronounced dead at just 38 years old, and the cause was acute heart failure. His death rocked the wrestling world, and the next night, WWE held a Raw tribute show where even the toughest of wrestlers broke down on TV, most notably Chris Benoit. Eddie Guerrero's death was truly one of the saddest days in professional wrestling. And up next we have Hana Kimura. Hana Kimura was a rising star in Japanese wrestling, and as a part of Stardom, she was one of the promotion's most popular wrestlers, earning championships and a devoted fan base. But her fame extended beyond wrestling. She was also cast in the Netflix reality TV show Terrace House. In 2020, a scene aired where Hana had a heated exchange with a cast member over a ruined wrestling costume. The backlash online was immediate and brutal. Fans online turned on her, bombarding her with hateful messages, many urging her to kill herself. The harassment was relentless, and instead of stepping in to protect her, Terrace House's producers leaned into the villain narrative, letting the abuse spiral out of control. Hana tried to push through the storm, but the weight became unbearable, and on May 23, 2020, at just 22 years old, Hana Kimura committed suicide, posting a series of heartbreaking messages before she passed. The wrestling world was shattered, and the Japanese public was forced to confront the dark consequences of cyberbullying and media exploitation. 3 men were arrested for their role in harassing Hana online, but their punishment was laughable, with the lowest fine being just $80. Her mother, Kyoko Kimura, continues to fight for her justice, refusing to let her daughter's memory be defined by the cruelty she endured. And up next we have Bruiser Brody. Bruiser Brody was a towering bearded monster of a man, known for his stiff, brawling style that made him a legend across the world. In 1998, Brody was working in Puerto Rico for the World Wrestling Council, WWC, a promotion run by Carlos Colon and Jose Gonzalez, better known as Invader One. The two had history. A year earlier, Brody had legitimately beaten down Gonzalez during a match, embarrassing him in front of his home Puerto Rico audience. Invader One reportedly took it personally, and those close to him recall him saying that one day he's going to kill Brody. On July 16, 1998, just before a scheduled match, Invader One approached Brody in the locker room, asking him to step into the shower area to discuss business. What happened next had no direct witnesses, but what followed was undeniable. 2 loud screams echoed through the locker room, stopping everyone in their tracks. When wrestlers rushed in, they found Bruiser Brody hunched over, clutching his stomach. Standing over him was Invader One, holding a knife. Brody had been stabbed twice in the abdomen. As Brody lay there dying, Tony Atlas was the only one who stepped in to help Bruiser Brody. The locker room didn't help Brody out of fear or loyalty to Invader One. It took over 40 minutes for an ambulance to arrive, and Brody was rushed into emergency surgery, but the damage was too severe. He died that night. What happened next was one of the most shocking cover-ups in wrestling history, as Invader One, Jose Gonzalez, was charged with the murder but pleaded self-defense, claiming Brody had attacked him. The Puerto Rican jury bought into kayfabe, believing that Brody's violent in-ring persona was real. Worse, key witnesses like Tony Atlas and Dutch Mantel were never properly summoned. Their court invitations conveniently arrived after the trial had already taken place. With no major testimony against him, Jose Gonzalez was acquitted. He walked free. He even continued wrestling, working in Puerto Rico for decades, despite literally getting away with murder. And up next we have Chyna. Chyna was a trailblazer, a woman who shattered barriers in a male-dominated industry. She redefined what was possible for women in wrestling, but after leaving WWE in 2001, her life spiraled into darkness. After WWE, Chyna turned to the adult film industry, starring in multiple films, including one with her ex, X-Pac, titled One Night in China. The wrestling world watched as she became more detached, more lost, battling addiction and mental health struggles. She appeared on Celebrity Rehab, revealing a deep struggle with alcohol and prescription drug abuse. WWE even offered to pay for her rehab, but Chyna refused, paranoid about their intentions. By 2016, she was living in isolation, her life a cycle of brief attempts at recovery followed by relapses. Then on April 20, 2016, Chyna was found dead in her home at age 46, and the cause was an accidental overdose of alcohol, oxycodone, Xanax, and muscle relaxers. The news devastated the wrestling community. Once an icon, now gone. It wasn't until 2019 that WWE finally inducted her into the WWE Hall of Fame, but even then, it was a part of DX, not as an individual, and she still has yet to be inducted as an individual to this day. And up next we have the Benoit family. Chris Benoit was one of the most technically gifted wrestlers of all time. His intensity, work ethic, and dedication to his craft earned him the respect of fans and peers alike. However, on June 24, 2007, Benoit was scheduled to wrestle at WWE's Vengeance Night of Champions pay-per-view, but he never showed up. Concern grew quickly as Benoit was known for his reliability. WWE officials contacted the police, who arrived at his home in Fayetteville, Georgia, and what they found inside was unimaginable. Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel were all dead. At first, investigators suspected a home invasion, but the reality was far more disturbing. Benoit had took the lives of his wife Nancy first, his son Daniel second, and then his own life last. The wrestling world was shocked, confused, and horrified. How could somebody so respected commit something so monstrous? Theories emerged in the aftermath. Some pointed towards CTE, the result of years of head trauma from repeated chair shots and his signature diving headbutt, and others cited roid abuse, as high levels of testosterone were found in his system, potentially causing severe mood swings and aggression. Some speculated that marital problems had also contributed to a breaking point. WWE initially aired a tribute episode on Raw, believing Benoit had been murdered, but as details emerged, WWE scrubbed his existence, his matches were pulled, and his name was never spoken again, and he was essentially erased from history. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 5, with our first entry on Tier 5 being Brian Pillman. Brian Pillman was a wild card in professional wrestling, a man whose loose cannon persona blurred the lines between fiction and reality. But behind the chaos of his character was a body breaking down. Years of injuries, including a devastating ankle injury in a car crash, left him reliant on painkillers just to keep performing. His body was deteriorating, but he refused to slow down. He signed with WWE in 1996, but by then he was a shell of the athlete that he once was, wrestling through excruciating pain. On October 5, 1997, Pillman was scheduled to face Dude Love at WWE's In Your House Bad Blood pay-per-view, but he never showed up. Concerned, police forced their way into his Bloomington, Minnesota hotel room. Inside, they found Pillman dead at just 35 years old. The cause was a massive heart attack caused by an undiagnosed heart disease, the same genetic condition that had taken his father's life at a young age. Years of painkiller use and physical abuse had only exacerbated the inevitable. WWE's handling of his death was disturbing. The next night on Raw, WWE aired an interview with Pillman's grieving widow, Melanie, pressing her about her drug use and financial troubles in a moment that many saw as insensitive and exploitative. And up next we have Miss Elizabeth. Miss Elizabeth was wrestling's first lady, the elegant, soft-spoken valet who became a household name alongside Macho Man Randy Savage. Though her relationship with Randy Savage was legendary, by the late 1990s, Elizabeth had moved on. She found herself in a relationship with Lex Luger, but it was toxic from the start. Their bond wasn't built on love, it was fueled by alcohol, pills, and domestic violence. On April 19, 2003, police were called to their home after Luger brutally assaulted Elizabeth, leaving her with 2 black eyes, a swollen lip, and a head injury. Luger was arrested, but Elizabeth still stayed with him. Less than 2 weeks later, on May 1, 2003, tragedy struck. Elizabeth overdosed in their Georgia home from a lethal cocktail of painkillers, vodka, and muscle relaxers shutting down her body. Luger was there when it happened, and he called 911, but it was too late. Miss Elizabeth was only 42 years old at the time of her death. Fans immediately grew suspicious. Many refused to believe that her death was accidental. Conspiracy theories spread, with some suggesting that Luger was responsible, and that the abusive relationship had escalated into something more sinister. But an investigation cleared him of any wrongdoing in her death. And up next we have Mitsuharu Misawa. Mitsuharu Misawa was more than just a legend, he was the heart and soul of Japanese wrestling. He had a long and storied career, but the end of his career was defined by one brutal reality. His body was breaking down and he refused to stop. On June 13, 2009, at the age of 46, Misawa wrestled his final match in Hiroshima for Pro Wrestling Noah, the company he founded after leaving AJPW. He teamed with Go Shiozaki to challenge for the GHC Tag Team Championships against Bison Smith and Akitoshi Saito. The match was like many others in his career, hard-hitting, intense, and dangerous. But then, nearly 30 minutes in, Saito delivered a routine back suplex, a move that Misawa had taken hundreds of times before. But this time, something was different. Misawa didn't get up. He lay motionless in the ring, unresponsive as panic set in. Wrestlers and officials rushed to his side. CPR was administered, but nothing worked. He was rushed to Hiroshima University Hospital, but there was nothing doctors could do. Misawa was pronounced dead. The wrestling world stood in shock. Though the move seemed like the cause, experts pointed out that Misawa's body had been a ticking time bomb. Years of wrestling a dangerously stiff, neck-breaking style left him in chronic pain, with doctors wanting him to stop. In fact, his neck was so damaged that it essentially collapsed upon impact. Despite Misawa's family publicly defending Saito, many fans blamed him, sending harassments and death threats. But in reality, Misawa's death was years in the making. And up next we have Umaga. Eddie Fatu, best known as Umaga, was a force of nature within the WWE. A member of the legendary Anoa'i family, his raw intensity and brutal in-ring style made him one of the most feared superstars of his era. But behind the destruction in the ring, Umaga was battling demons. WWE's grueling schedule and the physical toll of his matches led to a reliance on painkillers and other substances. In 2009, he was released for violating WWE's wellness policy and refusing rehab. His career should have continued elsewhere, but instead, his story took a tragic turn. On December 4, 2009, Umaga was found unresponsive in his Houston home. He had suffered a massive heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support, but doctors couldn't save him. Hours later, Umaga was pronounced dead at just 36 years old. The autopsy revealed the cause: acute toxicity of multiple drugs, including painkillers, muscle relaxers, and anxiety medication. His passing sent shockwaves throughout the wrestling world. And up next we have Curt Hennig. Curt Hennig, better known as Mr. Perfect, was one of the most naturally gifted wrestlers to ever step into the ring. But by the early 2000s, years of injuries, pain, and the wrestling lifestyle had taken their toll. Hennig struggled with addiction, using a mix of painkillers, roids, and recreational drugs to cope. His once legendary career was winding down, and while he was still making appearances, he was no longer the same Mr. Perfect that fans once knew. Then, on February 10, 2003, tragedy struck. Hennig was found dead in his Florida hotel room at just 44 years old. The official cause was acute coke intoxication. However, his father, Larry the Axe Hennig, later stated that roids and painkillers also played a role in his death. The wrestling world mourned the loss of a true great, but the reality was all too familiar: another case of substance abuse and a body pushed past its limits. Hennig, though, was eventually inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2007. And up next we have Shad Gaspard. Shad Gaspard was best known as one half of Crime Time in WWE, and he was charismatic, powerful, and beloved by fans. However, on May 17, 2020, Shad and his 10-year-old son were swimming at Venice Beach, Los Angeles, when a powerful rip current pulled them and a group of swimmers into deeper waters. Lifeguards rushed in, trying to save as many people as they could. As the waves crashed around them, Shad made a split-second decision. He told the lifeguards to save his own son first. That decision cost him his life. When Shad's son was pulled to safety, a massive wave struck Shad, dragging him beneath the surface. He never resurfaced, and for 2 days, search teams, fellow wrestlers, and the Coast Guard scoured the ocean, but hope faded. Then, on May 20, his body washed ashore, confirming the worst. Shad Gaspard was gone at just 39 years old. His death was devastating, but his final moments cemented his legacy as a father first and foremost. His widow later filed a lawsuit against the state of California and the city of Los Angeles, claiming negligence and a lack of warning signs about the dangers of swimming there. In 2022, WWE posthumously awarded him the Warrior Award, recognizing his bravery and selflessness. And up next we have Rick Rude. Ravishing Rick Rude was the ultimate heel. A man who oozed arrogance with every word, every flex, and every smirk. He is widely considered to be one of the greatest wrestlers to never win a world championship. However, in 1999, Rude was in training for a return back to the ring, pushing himself to recapture his former glory, but his body had already endured years of punishment, and he relied on medications to keep himself going. Then, on the morning of April 20, 1999, tragedy struck, as his wife found him unconscious. By the time help arrived, it was too late, and Rick Rude was dead at just 40 years old. The autopsy revealed that Rick Rude had suffered heart failure due to an overdose of mixed medications, and the most prominent one was GHB. His death was ruled as an accident. And up next we have Hayabusa. Hayabusa was the heart and soul of Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, FMW, and he was a man whose high-flying style and mass persona made him one of the most beloved figures in Japanese wrestling. His innovative offense, especially his signature springboard moonsault, captivated fans and inspired a generation of wrestlers. On October 22, 2001, Hayabusa was in the ring for what should have been a routine match. He attempted a springboard moonsault, a move that he had executed countless times before, but his foot slipped on the ropes. He didn't get the height he needed, and instead, he fell straight down, landing head first on the mat. The damage was instant and catastrophic. He fractured 2 vertebrae in his neck, rendering him paralyzed. The accident not only ended his career on the spot, but it was also one of the key reasons FMW shut down the following year. Without its ace, the promotion couldn't survive. For the next 14 years, Hayabusa was confined to a wheelchair, a painful reality for a man who had once soared through the air with ease. But in 2015, a miracle happened. After years of therapy and determination, he was able to stand and walk a few steps, an emotional moment that proved his spirit was still unbreakable. But the triumph was short-lived, as on March 3, 2016, just 1 year after that miraculous display, Hayabusa passed away at the age of 47 due to natural causes. And up next, we have Daffney. Daffney was one of wrestling's unsung heroes, a performer ahead of her time who blended gothic charisma with hardcore toughness. She became known for her willingness to take brutal punishment, proving that women's wrestling could be just as extreme as the men's. But that same fearlessness ultimately cost her everything. Daffney suffered multiple concussions, the most severe being in 2010, when she was chokeslammed onto a barbed wire board. The effects were devastating. Lingering post-concussion symptoms made it impossible for her to wrestle again, but instead of helping her with her medical bills, TNA just released her, leaving her to deal with the aftermath alone, and Daffney never returned to the ring. The years that followed were filled with pain and isolation. The effects of head trauma, financial struggles, and mental health battles weighed on her. Then, on 1 September 2021, fans witnessed something horrifying. Daffney went live on Instagram, visibly distressed, reading what appeared to be a final note, and urging her brain to be donated for CTE testing, and she was holding what looked to be a... Fans immediately flooded social media, begging for someone to reach her in time. Law enforcement rushed to her home, but it was too late. Daffney had herself at just 46 years old. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 4, with our first entry on Tier 4 being Yokozuna. Yokozuna was a force unlike any other in WWE history. Standing at over 500 pounds, he moved with an agility that defied his size. But behind the dominance was a man battling his own body, as in 1998, Yokozuna's weight had spiraled out of control, and WWE released him after doctors warned of serious health risks. Despite attempts to lose weight and return, he continued wrestling on the independent circuit, unable to let go of the business, but his body just couldn't keep up. Then, on October 23, 2000, tragedy struck. While in Liverpool, England, Yokozuna passed away in his hotel room from pulmonary edema, a condition where fluid builds up in the lungs, making it impossible to breathe. He was just 34 years old. And up next we have Plum Mariko. Plum Mariko was a technical genius in Japanese women's wrestling and a master of submissions and precision-based offense. Competing for Japan Women's Pro Wrestling, JWP, she was respected for her skill and toughness, but behind the scenes, her body was deteriorating. Years of brutal matches had left her with numerous concussions, and by the late 90s, her memory had started to fade. She would often forget match sequences, a clear sign that something was very wrong. Yet, like so many wrestlers before her, she pressed on. But on August 15, 1997, Plum Mariko stepped into the ring for what would be her final match. As the match unfolded, she took a Liger Bomb, a move that she was supposed to kick out of, but she never moved. The referee, sensing something was off, counted to 3 and ended the match. But still, Plum Mariko remained motionless on the mat. Panic set in as the ring crew rushed to check in on her, but she was unresponsive. She was immediately taken to a hospital, but hours later, she was pronounced dead at 29 years old. Later, an autopsy revealed the tragic truth. Plum Mariko didn't die from the move itself, but from years of accumulated brain trauma. Doctors discovered an abscess on her brain, caused by years of repeated concussions and head injuries. The damage had been building up for years, and that final match was simply the straw that broke the camel's back. And up next we have Reid Flair. Reid Flair was supposed to be the next great wrestling prodigy, carrying on the legacy of his father, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Growing up surrounded by the business, he had the pedigree, the talent, and the potential to follow in his father's footsteps, but behind the promise of a bright future was a battle with addiction that he couldn't escape. For years, Reid struggled with substance abuse, an issue that haunted him despite his many attempts to get clean. He had been arrested several times for drug-related offenses, but each time, he tried to pick himself back up. His family never stopped believing in him, and his father especially had high hopes that he would one day rise above his demons and become a star in wrestling. But on 29 March 2013, tragedy struck, as Reid was found unresponsive in bed at a residence inn in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was just 25 years old. The autopsy revealed the cause, which was a fatal dose of H combined with Xanax. Ric Flair was devastated. He had tried everything to help his son, but his addiction had taken him too soon. The wrestling world mourned another young life lost, and another story of potential never fulfilled. And up next we have Chris Kanyon. Chris Kanyon was one of the most underrated wrestlers of his time. With his willingness to push boundaries, he entertained millions, but behind the scenes, Kanyon was fighting a deep personal battle. Kanyon struggled with bipolar disorder, a condition that caused severe mood swings and bouts of depression. He kept much of his personal turmoil hidden, but the weight of his struggles grew heavier over the years. One of Kanyon's biggest personal conflicts was with his sexuality. At a time when being openly gay in wrestling was almost unheard of, Kanyon kept his truth a secret, fearing how it would affect his career. When he eventually came out backstage, he claimed that WWE had held him back because of this, though some disputed this. Still, the isolation, the industry's rejection, and his ongoing mental health struggles took their toll. In the weeks leading up to April 2, 2010, Kanyon spoke openly about himself, but many hoped he was just venting. Then, his worst fears became reality when Kanyon's brother found him dead, having killed himself at just 40 years old. And up next we have Luna Vachon. Luna Vachon was one of the most unique and intense figures in wrestling history. With a raspy voice, chaotic energy, and unmatched presence, she stood out in an era where women in wrestling were often pushed aside. However, after a career in 2009, she suffered a devastating loss. Her home was destroyed in a fire, taking all of her wrestling memorabilia and personal possessions with it. The fire left her emotionally shattered, and despite support from friends like Mick Foley, the damage was done. Luna had completed rehab in 2009, with WWE even paying for her treatment, but the grip of addiction pulled her back in. She refused to return to wrestling, officially turning down an offer from TNA in early 2010. Then, on August 27, 2010, tragedy struck. Luna was found dead in her Florida home by her mother. She was just 48 years old, and the cause was an overdose of oxycodone and Xanax. Investigators found crushed pills and snorting straws in multiple locations, evidence of an addiction she had been fighting for years. And up next we have Riki Dozan. Riki Dozan was the father of modern Japanese wrestling. A former sumo wrestler turned pro wrestler, he became a national hero in post-war Japan. Without him, Puroresu as we know it wouldn't exist. However, on October 8, 1963, things would change, as Riki Dozan was in a nightclub in Tokyo when he got into a drunken altercation with a Yakuza member. The situation escalated, and Riki Dozan was stabbed in the abdomen. Initially, the wound was declared non-fatal, and he underwent surgery to repair the damage, but what should have been a survivable injury turned into a death sentence, because as soon as he returned home from the hospital, he began drinking heavily. The alcohol caused his condition to worsen rapidly, leading to a severe infection at the wound site, and just 1 week later, on December 15, 1963, Riki Dozan died from an infection of the abdominal lining. He was only 39 years old. And up next we have Test. Andrew Test Martin had all the makings of a top star. The look, the size, and the in-ring ability, standing in at 6'6" with a chiseled physique. But while his career had promise, his lack of charisma and mic skills kept him from breaking into the main event scene. Throughout his career, Test also had substance abuse problems, and in 2009, those problems would come to a head. On March 13, 2009, Test was found dead in his apartment in Tampa, Florida at just 33 years old. The cause was an overdose of oxycodone. Later, Test showed that he suffered from severe CTE, the same brain condition linked to repeated head trauma in contact sports. It was clear that years of punishment in the ring had taken a toll not just on his body, but on his mind as well. And up next we have Perro Aguayo Jr. Perro Aguayo Jr. was a legend in the making, a second-generation wrestler who carried the weight of his father's legacy while carving out his own path in Mexican wrestling. He was a trailblazer in AAA and CMLL, but in 2015, his career came to a sudden and tragic end in the most unthinkable way. Aguayo wrestled his final match in Tijuana, teaming with TJ Perkins against Rey Mysterio Jr. and Extreme Tiger. The match was supposed to be a routine contest, with Aguayo taking Mysterio's signature 619 finisher, but something went terribly wrong. During the sequence, Aguayo was meant to be draped over the second rope, but he slumped forward, motionless. Mysterio's dropkick to set up the move caused severe whiplash, and the impact snapped Aguayo's neck, breaking his C1, C2, and C3 vertebrae. The damage was instant and fatal. He suffered a cervical stroke, leading to cardiac arrest almost immediately. At first, no one in the ring realized what had happened. Conan, who was ringside, rushed over to check on him, but he was unresponsive. It wasn't until minutes later that the severity of the situation became clear. He was rushed to Del Prado Hospital, but by then, it was too late. Perro Aguayo Jr. was pronounced dead at just 35 years old. The wrestling world was devastated, and Rey Mysterio was especially heartbroken, later stating that Aguayo was not just a great wrestler, but a great human being. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 3, with our first entry on Tier 3 being Crash Holly. Crash Holly was one of WWF's most entertaining underdogs, bringing energy, humor, and chaos to the hardcore championship scene during the Attitude Era. But behind the fun-loving persona, Crash Holly was fighting a battle that no one could see. After leaving WWE in 2003, his life took a dark turn. He went through a divorce from his wife, which sent him into a deep depression. As the wrestling world moved on, Crash struggled with drug abuse and alcohol, and his mental state continued to deteriorate. Then on November 6, 2003, Crash Holly was found dead at the home of his friend, wrestler Stevie Richards. The cause was a drug overdose combined with alcohol, and later his death was ruled as a... He was just 32 years old. And up next we have Emiko Kado. Emiko Kado was a young, promising wrestler who had an entire career ahead of her, wrestling for Ataz, formerly Arcean. Despite losing all of her matches, her trainers and promoters saw something special inside of her. But on March 31, 1999, during her 15th match in professional wrestling, disaster struck. During the match, Emiko Kado took a back suplex and landed hard on her head. As she laid unconscious in the ring, the match was immediately stopped and she was rushed to a nearby hospital. Doctors performed emergency brain surgery, discovering that she had suffered a brain hemorrhage. She was placed in a coma, but after 9 days of fighting for her life, Emiko Kado passed away on April 9, 1999 at just 23 years old. And up next we have Mike Awesome. Mike Awesome was a powerhouse wrestler who redefined what a big man could do in the ring. Standing in at 6'6" and over 290 pounds, he wasn't just a brute, he was athletic, fast, and had a cruiserweight moveset. By 2006, Mike Awesome had retired from the business and transitioned into real estate, but at the same time, his personal life was falling apart. His marriage, something he believed was stable, was crumbling without him realizing it. Then one day in 2007, his wife dropped a bombshell that she was leaving him. This news shattered Mike Awesome, and in the heat of the moment, he allegedly did some domestic violence on his wife. She called the police and Awesome was arrested. While in jail, he called his wife, only to hear the final blow, that she was divorcing him, taking their 2 children and leaving him with nothing. When Awesome was released from jail, he returned home to a devastating sight. His house was nearly empty, many of his personal belongings destroyed or thrown away. Reports also claim that his wife had even disposed of some of his most valuable possessions, leaving him completely alone and lost. And on February 17, 2007, Mike Awesome himself in his home. He was only 42 years old. And up next we have Bam Bigelow. Bam Bigelow was a one-of-a-kind athlete, a 400-pound monster who moved with the agility of a cruiserweight. But behind his intimidating persona was a man whose body and mind were breaking down. By the early 2000s, Bigelow's career had slowed down due to numerous injuries. Years of punishment, high-risk moves, and a physically demanding style had taken their toll. Like many wrestlers of his era, he turned to painkillers and other substances to cope. And on January 19, 2007, Bam Bigelow was found dead in his home at just 45 years old. The autopsy revealed a lethal combination of coke and Xanax in his system. His death was ruled as accidental. And up next we have Sherri Martel. Sherri Martel was one of wrestling's greatest valets. She brought a unique mix of charisma, toughness, and intensity, but while her career was filled with legendary moments, her personal life took a much darker turn. After leaving the spotlight of WWE and WCW, Sherri's life spiraled into substance abuse. She developed a dependence on painkillers and other drugs. Then, on June 15, 2007, Sherri was found dead at her mother's home in Alabama. She was 49 years old. The autopsy later revealed that she had overdosed on multiple substances, with oxycodone being the most prominent. And up next we have Brian Christopher Lawler. Brian Christopher Lawler, better known to WWE fans as Too Sexy Brian Christopher, was a natural entertainer who made his name in the WWE. Despite the bright lights of his career, he lived in the shadow of his father, Jerry the King Lawler. After leaving WWE, Brian Christopher Lawler's life took a downward spiral. He wrestled on the independent circuit and TNA, but legal troubles followed him everywhere. DUI arrests, drug possession charges, and run-ins with the law began stacking up, and in early 2018, things had reached their breaking point. On July 7, 2018, Brian Christopher Lawler was arrested for DUI and evading police, leading to his incarceration at the Hardman County Jail in Tennessee. His mental state deteriorated behind bars, and just 3 weeks later, on July 29, 2018, he was found unresponsive in his cell. He was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead at 46 years old. His death was ruled a but many, including his father, Jerry the King Lawler, have questioned the official report, believing there was more to the story. Jerry Lawler has spoken publicly about mysterious injuries found on Brian's body, hinting that foul play may have been involved, though nothing has ever been confirmed. And up next we have Hiromitsu Gonpai. Kensuke Sasaki is a Japanese wrestling icon and a multi-time IWGP heavyweight champion and former WCW United States champion. His career is filled with legendary battles, but one incident that he's involved in is rarely discussed, and that is the death of Hiromitsu Gonpai. The New Japan Pro Wrestling Dojo is known for its brutal training system, where young wrestlers, young lions, are pushed beyond their limits to prepare for the unforgiving world of Japanese wrestling. It was in this intense environment that Hiromitsu Gonpai, a trainee struggling to meet expectations, met his tragic fate. According to the book Ring the Bell, Gonpai was not performing up to standard, which reportedly led to the trainer, Kensuke Sasaki, punishing him with repeated suplexes and physical beatings. The blows to his head caused severe trauma, and he collapsed during training. Gonpai was rushed to the hospital, but he did not survive. The incident has never fully been acknowledged by New Japan Pro Wrestling, and Sasaki was never formally charged, but wrestlers such as Scott Norton and Bam Bigelow have referenced Sasaki's involvement in shoot interviews, fueling speculation that the dojo's harsh training methods went too far that day. And up next we have Sara Lee. Sara Lee was a name full of promise in WWE, a rising star who captured the attention of fans by winning Season 6 of WWE's Tough Enough in 2015. Her victory earned her a $250,000 contract with WWE, seemingly setting her up for a bright future in wrestling. But despite her athletic ability and determination, things didn't work out. Her time with WWE was brief, and after just 1 year, she was released from her contract. One of the positives from her WWE experience, however, was that she met and later married Wesley Blake, formerly of the faction Forgotten Sons. Together, they built a life outside of wrestling and had 2 children. From the outside, it seemed like she had moved on, focusing on family and new opportunities, but behind the scenes, Sara was struggling. On October 5, 2022, Sara Lee killed herself at just 30 years old. The autopsy report revealed that she had alcohol and pills in her system, and that the bruising on her head and body was consistent with falls while heavily intoxicated. Police also discovered letters of intent, confirming that this was a deliberate and heartbreaking decision. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 2, with our first entry on Tier 2 being Brian Ong. Brian Ong was a young aspiring wrestler training at All Pro Wrestling's boot camp in Hayward, California, with dreams of making it in the business, but those dreams were cut short in the most tragic way possible. In 2001, Dalip Singh, later known as the Great Khali, was still a rookie, standing in at an immense 7'3" and 420 pounds, but he only had 7 months of experience in the business. Ong, meanwhile, was still a trainee. During a training session, the Great Khali executed a flapjack, a move where the opponent is supposed to land flat on their stomach, but Ong landed awkwardly on his head instead. Shockingly, APW's medical staff allowed him to keep training that day. Not long after, he took another move from the Great Khali, but this time it was fatal. Ong collapsed and died from severe head trauma at just 27 years old. His grieving family sued APW and the Great Khali for wrongful death, arguing that Ong should have never been allowed to continue training after his first injury. The court ruled in their favor, and the family was awarded $1 million in damages. As for the Great Khali, he was cleared of any wrongdoing, as the court ruled that the negligence fell on APW's trainers and medical staff. The Great Khali would then go on to become a world champion in WWE. However, he has never publicly spoken about the incident. And up next we have Mirai. Mirai was a young and promising wrestler, entering the world of Joshi Puroresu with high hopes and determination. She began training at the All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling Dojo, AJPW, at just 18 years old, debuting in 2001. After wrestling for less than 6 months, she left AJW in 2002, becoming inactive for a year. Eventually, she found a new home in Arcian in 2003, where she stayed for almost 2 years. However, by 2005, Mirai's struggles with depression became overwhelming. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, leading her to leave Arcian. During this time, she kept an online diary where she spoke openly about her depression, frustrations with medication, and previous attempts to commit. She wanted to get better, but nothing seemed to help. Despite her personal battles, Mirai returned to wrestling in mid-2005, continuing to push forward even while suffering in silence. Then, on September 14, 2005, everything changed, because at 2 p.m., Mirai was found unconscious in the bathtub of her apartment. She was rushed to the hospital, but was pronounced dead at just 22 years old. Despite her history of depression and past attempts, her death was officially ruled as accidental. And up next we have Gino Hernandez. Gino Hernandez was the embodiment of excess, as he was a wrestler who lived as fast as he worked. He was successful in the ring, but outside he lived a lavish, reckless lifestyle with far more dangerous company, and his personal life was spiraling out of control. Then, in February of 1986, tragedy struck. Hernandez was found dead in his apartment, his body laying on the bedroom floor for days, before anyone discovered him. And the cause was acute coke toxicity, but the details surrounding his death only fueled speculation. The coroner found 8 times the lethal dose of coke in his system, an amount so high that many questioned whether this was truly an accidental overdose. His apartment door was also unlocked, despite him reportedly always being paranoid and deadbolting it shut every day. People close to him believe that his ties to the drug underworld led to his death being a hit, an example made by very dangerous people. No formal murder investigation was opened. Authorities ruled it as a coke overdose, but the mystery has never really been fully put to rest. And up next we have Oro. Oro was a rising star in Lucha Libre, and a second-generation wrestler with a bright future ahead of him. He competed for CMLL, and many believe that he could become one of Mexico's top stars. In October of 1993, Oro wrestled a 6-man tag team match at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City. Before the match, Oro wanted to add dramatic effect to the bout, telling his fellow wrestlers that he planned to take a Kobashi bump, a dangerous headfirst landing to sell a move, similar to what Kenta Kobashi had recently done in AJPW. During the match, another wrestler called Kahaz hit Oro with a clothesline. As planned, Oro sold the move by landing on his head, but something went terribly wrong. His body went limp instantly. When Kahaz attempted to pick him up, Oro completely collapsed, unresponsive. He was rushed to the back and placed in an ambulance. He was already gone. He was just 21 years old. Since Oro's parents refused an autopsy, the exact cause of his death remains unknown, though it's believed that he suffered a brain aneurysm triggered by the impact. His death shocked the entire Lucha Libre world. Even AAA, a rival promotion that had a heated feud with CMLL at the time, acknowledged his passing, a rare show of respect in an era of bitter competition. And up next we have Giant Ochi. Giant Ochi was a former MMA fighter who transitioned into professional wrestling. Standing in at 6'1" and weighing nearly 300 pounds, he was a powerhouse in the making. Ochi's MMA career was modest but respectable, with a record of 3 wins, 3 losses, and 2 draws. His transition into wrestling seemed like a natural step forward, and he entered World Japan's dojo to train under Kensuke Sasaki. However, Japan's dojo system is notoriously brutal, often pushing trainees to their absolute physical limits, and for Ochi, the consequences were fatal. During an intense training session in July of 2003, Ochi collapsed and lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital, where he slipped into a coma. For over a month, he remained unresponsive, but then on August 8, 2003, he passed away at just 35 years old. An autopsy later revealed the cause of death, and it was an acute subdermal hematoma, a fatal brain hemorrhage caused by severe trauma. The fallout was immediate and severe. Kensuke Sasaki was fired from World Japan and was allegedly blackballed from every major promotion in Japan, as many people pointed toward him for Ochi's death. Riki Choshu was the owner of World Japan, and the Japanese media also turned its attention to him, questioning the safety and brutality of his dojo. Ochi's family publicly accused Choshu of negligence, stating that he failed to take responsibility for what happened. With controversy mounting and its reputation shattered, World Japan folded by the end of 2003, less than a year after the tragic incident. And up next we have Dino Bravo. Dino Bravo was a Canadian wrestling icon, a powerhouse who dominated the Canadian wrestling scene in the 1970s before making his mark in WWE. But while his in-ring career made him a legend in Canada, his life after wrestling is where things went wrong. By the early 1990s, Bravo had retired and settled into life outside of the ring, training up-and-coming wrestlers in Montreal. However, training wrestlers didn't provide the financial security he needed, and rumors began circulating that Bravo had turned to illegal cigarette smuggling, a highly lucrative but dangerous business controlled by the mafia. And then on March 10, 1993, Dino Bravo was found dead in his home, shot 11 times. The brutal nature of the attack left no doubt. This was a targeted hit. Shortly before his death, Bravo reportedly confided in Bret the Hitman Hart, telling him that he knew his days were numbered. But despite speculation to his connections to organized crime, no one has ever been formally charged or arrested for his murder. And now we're moving down the iceberg into the deepest tier, Tier 1, with our first entry on Tier 1 being the Renegade. When Hulk Hogan arrived in WCW, the company wanted to recreate the magic of his WWE feuds, including his rivalry with the Ultimate Warrior. But rather than bringing the Warrior in, WCW decided to manufacture their own version of him. And so, the Renegade was born. Portrayed by Rick Wilson, the Renegade was WCW's attempt at a homegrown warrior, complete with the face paint, tassels, bodybuilder physique, and high-energy mannerisms. He was marketed as WCW's next big star, debuting in 1995 as Hogan's Alley, and even went on to win the WCW Television Championship. But the act never truly connected to the fans, who saw him as nothing more than a cheap imitation. As time pressed on, his push faded, and by 1996, he was relegated to a jobber. His credibility never recovered, and by December 1998, he was released from WCW. With no job and no major promotion willing to sign him, Wilson spiraled into depression. To cope, he began using GHB, a severe depressant. His mental health continued to decline, and without wrestling, he felt that he had nothing left. Then, on February 23, 1999, just 3 months after his WCW release, Rick Wilson committed. He was only 33 years old. And up next we have Abismo. Abismo was one of Mexico's most beloved lucha libre stars. He was a key figure in AAA, and he was known for his high-flying moves, charismatic presence, and intense rivalries. But behind the mask, his personal struggles remained hidden, and on March 20, 2009, it all came to a head. On this day, Abismo was traveling on a bus to Mexico City, and then in the middle of the night, around 1:30 a.m., he reportedly became agitated and panicked, demanding to be let off the bus, despite the pitch-black, unfamiliar surroundings. The bus driver complied, and Abismo stepped into the darkness alone. Shortly after, he sent a text message to his wife, stating that he was lost in the hills. Concerned, his wife contacted the local wrestling promoter, Vicente Martinez, who immediately organized a search party, but hours turned into a full day and no sign of Abismo could be found. Then on March 22, the worst fears were confirmed. Abismo's lifeless body was discovered floating face down in a river near El Rosario, Sinaloa. An autopsy ruled the cause of death as drowning, and no foul play was suspected. However, medical experts speculated that his panic attack may have been linked to roid abuse, though this was never confirmed. The circumstances of his final moments remain a mystery, leaving more questions than answers. In a bizarre and disturbing twist, on the same night he died, a wrestler wearing Abismo's mask competed at a AAA wrestling show. It was later revealed to be an imposter, sparking outrage and national media coverage. The local promoter responsible for the show was suspended for 2 years for allowing such a disrespectful hoax to take place. And up next we have Shoichi Arai. Shoichi Arai was not a wrestler, but his impact on the wrestling world was undeniable. As the owner and promoter of Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, he spent 7 years running the promotion, trying to keep it afloat despite financial struggles. As in the early 2000s, FMW was in dire financial trouble. Desperate to keep the company alive, Arai made a fateful decision. He turned to the Yakuza for financial help. The Japanese mafia loaned him approximately $1 million, but FMW collapsed in 2002, leaving Arai drowning in debt with no way to pay them back. Fearing for his life and his family's safety, Arai went into hiding, knowing that the Yakuza wouldn't let the debt go unpaid. With no other options, he devised a tragic plan. He would take his own life so that his life insurance money could cover the debt, and in May of 2002, Arai followed through on his plan in a public park. His insurance payout went to his wife and child, who then used the money to pay off the Yakuza, but the amount wasn't enough to fully clear the debt, and for years after his death, Arai's family continued making payments, haunted by the weight of Arai's final decision. And up next we have La Parkita and Espectrito 2. Alberto and Alejandro Jimenez were twin brothers who were dwarfs, and they were established athletes in the AAA promotion in Mexico. There they competed under the ring names of La Parkita and Espectrito 2. Despite being little people and having a very short height, they managed to make it to the WWE and had a pretty successful wrestling career, but it was all cut short in 2009 when the twin brothers were found dead in their hotel room. It was reported that the two dwarf brothers checked into a hotel after a Sunday night wrestling show, and allegedly 2 female fornication sellers approached the wrestlers and were invited back to their hotel room. In the hotel room, the 2 women spiked the men's alcohol with what was believed to be eye drops. The brothers drank this toxic concoction, and the 2 women proceeded to rob them of their wallets and cell phones. The twins sadly died from the drugs added to their alcohol. Usually what these 2 fornication sellers did not kill the victims, but the size of La Parkita and Espectrito 2 played a significant role in their deaths. The 2 women were eventually arrested and were sentenced to 47 years in prison for the murder of the little twins. And now we're at the deepest entry of the iceberg, Rockin Rebel. Chuck Williams, better known as Rockin Rebel, was a journeyman wrestler who competed in ECW, WCW, and various independent promotions. Trained by the legendary Rock and Roll Express, he became a familiar face in early ECW, often appearing in preliminary matches. The Rockin Rebel's wrestling career was unremarkable though, and eventually he retired from wrestling. The Rockin Rebel was married to his childhood sweetheart Stephanie, and together they had twin children, but behind closed doors, their marriage was anything but happy. Reports indicate that the Rockin Rebel was abusive, controlling, and domineering, creating a toxic and dangerous household. Eventually, his wife had had enough, and she filed an order of protection against her husband, but before she could fully break free, tragedy struck in the worst possible way, because on June 1, 2018, the Rockin Rebel snapped. The Rockin Rebel murdered her in cold blood before taking his own life, and then the next morning, their 2 10-year-old twins, just innocent children, discovered the bodies of their parents, an unspeakable trauma that they will carry for the rest of their lives. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and if you enjoyed this video, please check out our other videos. But anyway, goodbye.